So I have my special guest I want to bring to the stage right now. She's a professor at Baruch. She wrote an amazing book called The Young Lords, A Radical History. Really great book. I recommend it. We'll talk about it, obviously. But please welcome to the stage the amazing Johanna Fernandez, everybody. All right. I know. Don't worry, I know. I'll cover that. But before we start, it is Johanna's birthday today. I got a surprise for you later. Don't worry. I got a surprise for her later. All right. So we are here with Johanna Fernandez, an incredible, professor at Baruch. She's also the author of that book I was telling you about. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming. So let's get right into it. Let's get into the hard-hitting questions. First question. Let me get mine out of my pocket. I got to juggle a lot of stuff here. Okay. First question. How are you?
I'm trying to figure this out. This is like the corniest, quirkiest thing I've ever done in my life, and the corniest, quirkiest event I've been to.
In a good way, right?
But wait, I also wonder if you are working with AI, because the flyer you produced for this has you all clean cut.
Those are old pictures.
Okay.
Very old pictures.
Just wondering.
All right, well, that was a tough start. I'm saying, good Lord, I hope the rest of the question answers are better than that. All right, well, let's keep it moving. Here we go. I'm actually scared now. All right, here we go. So you wrote this book, The Young Lords. It's a great book. It covers, so if you guys don't know, the Young Lords were basically a radical revolutionary group similar to the Black Panthers, kind of like what you would call like a sister party to the Black Panthers, but it was basically focused more on Puerto Rican and Hispanic and Latino communities in East Harlem. That's when it started. It branched out a little bit, but it only lasted a couple years until 1971. From 1969, it started in Chicago as a gang, actually, that became politicized, and then it spread to New York. An incredible, incredible story, and you wrote this book. And I think what's interesting about it is that this story, even though it took place in the late 60s, early 70s, is still, I think, very relevant today. How would you say this revolutionary group is still relevant today, to start?
Yowza.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? On my way over here, I took a cab. All the way from Washington Heights, by the way, where I live. So I wondered if maybe that was an ode to me.
The taxi thing?
Yeah. No, the Washington Heights run through.
Oh, sure. Nice.
And I read the conclusion of my book on the ride over here, and I start the conclusion with the title, Beware of Movements. And what I mean by that is that all of the movements of the 60s, which are important for reasons we'll talk about later, were products of mass movements of people, mostly from countryside to city. So Black Americans, Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans migrated from rural areas to cities after World War II. And these movements, during and after World War II, these movements of people inspired and drove the social movements of the 60s. Similarly today, we share an ethnicity, kind of, sort of. I don't know if you guys remember of what happened in this country in 2006. But 2006 is important because undocumented migrants just appeared out of nowhere in mass protests. Like in Salt Lake City, Utah. Masses, I'm talking about tens of thousands of migrants protested against their exploitation, the stealing of their wages, and more. And they are a product of the mass migration that was produced by the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement in the 1990s, early 1990s, which essentially displaced farmers in Mexico and Latin America. And they moved to cities like New York, to East Harlem, in fact. And so here they became the super exploited people who replaced Black Americans after the Civil Rights Movement. And their condition of oppression and exploitation led to these movements. So that's one.
Yeah, and when you say that, that's interesting too, because not only were the actual on-the-ground conditions in Puerto Rico, for example, and Operation Bootstrap, and all the the laborers who had no jobs and they came here looking for work. Not only were those conditions also kind of making this movement begin, but also I guess the academic, the intellectual atmosphere at the time. You know, they kind of they use their blueprint of the Black Panthers. This idea of post-colonial theory, Frantz Fanon, all these different, I guess, theories were being talked about, were accepted at the time, and were being kind of, I guess, spread that way. And then these groups were based on them, right?
So the Young Lords are the children of the Puerto Rican migration that happens after 1947. In 1947, the United States initiates an industrialization project of the island of Puerto Rico. And more farmers are displaced than can be absorbed by the new industrial economy. But there's, an escape valve for all of those massively displaced people. And that escape valve is organized by the government of the United States, and it's migration of displaced Puerto Ricans to cities like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia. A third of the people of the island are displaced. That's a dismembering of a nation. And historians note that that kind of mass movement of people in one country is comparable proportionally to the migration of 25 million European immigrants to cities like New York in the late 19th century. So the Young Lords were the children of that migration. And they essentially landed in a city that was in a process of deindustrialization, where housing was hard to come by, and where police brutality was a problem, as it continues to be today. That generation of people were radicalized. They also migrated into the civil rights, Black Power movements, into the anti-war movement, and their consciousness was influenced by those dynamics.
Yes, and I thought it interesting in the book, you brought up how a lot of these literal kids, because the oldest young lord at the time, I guess, was 25. They were really young, 25 years old. You guys, do yourselves a favor and don't think about what you did when you were 25 years old. These guys were organizing protests. They were changing people's hearts and minds. It's pretty incredible what they did. But one of the ways they became radical, as you wrote in your book, was they served as basically translators for their parents. They would basically navigate the healthcare system. They would navigate the infrastructure, the city, all of these things for their parents, and basically got a firsthand look at how messed up and how lopsided it was, right?
So part of what I argue in the book and I explain is that, and this is a quintessential American experience, that the children of that migration underwent the crucible of migration. They were bilingual, right? Some of them were born here, others grew up here but were born on the island. And they were interlocutors in their community. They translated for their parents' friends, their neighbors, in the hospitals, in the public schools, and at police precincts. So at a very young age, they were organically politicized. And I'm quoting from one of them now. And they came to understand the difference between how they were perceived, right, in a racist society by the bureaucrats in these institutions versus how we viewed ourselves. And that happened in the context in the hospital of illness when you're most vulnerable. So they experienced, as children, the ways in which their parents were discriminated against under conditions, of illness. And this rankled them to the core. And by the time they grew up, they were able to organize politically with these organic impulses about what was wrong in their society.
And they were pissed off too. I guess
They were pissed off.
That's also a big
to
part
say
of
the
it.
least.
Yeah.
So they were rabble rousers. They were
Right.
militants, radicals, revolutionaries.
Right. Now that's an interesting word. I thought it might be. I guess people hear young lords. They immediately think of violence. They think of like the military fatigues, the berets, and this kind of call to like the quoting Che Guevara and the being inspired by Cuban Revolution and all these different things. But the young lords were actually nonviolent. Like their methods were nonviolent. So what really, I guess, would separate them? What does it mean to be revolutionary when they're nonviolent? How are they different from another, let's say, organization that's looking to influence politics or influence City Hall?
Well, I wouldn't say they are nonviolent.
Well, self-defense, I guess.
They believed in armed self-defense, and they were revolutionaries. And revolutions usually require some kind of military engagement, not because revolutionaries are violent, but because the society they're challenging is going to do whatever it needs to do to suppress rebellion. Think about the American Revolution. The British, didn't say, "Hey, let's come over and exchange what is it that they cucumber sandwiches over a picnic," right?
That sounds gross.
The British fought. The British fought the colonies with arms, and so the colonists had no choice but to arm themselves. So, but the young lords, they weren't operating in conditions of war and revolution. They were operating here in New York City, in their neighborhoods, in East Harlem and the Bronx. So they engaged in militant protests. So they occupied a hospital in the Bronx, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know. And they did that. Why are you guys clapping? That's pretty amazing. They occupied the hospital to dramatize the horrific conditions under which Puerto Ricans and Black Americans were receiving care. Mm-hmm. They occupied a church, which is pretty sacrilegious, given that, people in their community were pretty religious, Catholic. And they're most known for their garbage protests. So sanitation was a huge problem in New York City for everyone, all neighborhoods. And we probably don't have time to go into this, but I discovered why. Of course, East Harlem and the Bronx and Harlem got horrific sanitation services, in part because of racism, of the sanitation department and its union, which was predominantly Irish and Italian. And so what the young lords did was that they picked up the garbage every Sunday. It accumulated, and they pushed the garbage into the major thoroughfare of their neighborhood and invited the neighborhood to burn it. And they stopped traffic for blocks, and their protests made it to the New York Times, but also made it to the mayoral debates of that year in 1969. And we owe the young lords, who's from New York here? Alternate side of the street parking.
So all the people sitting in their cars on their phones waiting for it to come through, you could thank them. Yeah, that's it. And also, you were talking about the occupation. I think that's really interesting, like the occupying the church. People hear that, and then immediately they probably tighten up. They're like, oh, man, that's really... But they were doing it so they could run, a free breakfast for children. They were running a free clinic for the neighborhood. Like they had gone through other avenues. That's another thing. They had gone through all the avenues that they were supposed to, and they were basically getting discriminated against and being told no. So they said, well, we want to fix what's going on here, so tough luck. And they occupied the church. They nailed the doors shut. And believe me, I grew up going to church. I thought about nailing the doors shut a lot. That's for sure. Sorry, that's a... Anyways.
They turned the church into a social service sanctuary for the poor.
Yep, and it's pretty amazing. All these, you hear the word occupy and all that stuff, and that's kind of what it did. And I think they did it with a reason. Like, they were young. They were all like 20, 19, 21. And you'd think that they were just lashing out, but it was all very calculated. They were all very studied. And a big part of their group was, believe it or not, at that age, was teaching and learning. Like, they would actually sit and they had a reading hour. That's crazy. What 19-year-old has a reading hour? I mean, but they were doing this. They were very driven and very intelligent. And so it was all very calculated to get attention, to have people look and see what was going on. And you talk about the occupation at the church. They got the attention of, like, Elia Kazan. They got, who else? Like Jane
Fonda.
Jane Fonda came to the, and they got money. Like, they got a huge amount of recruits from this. So it was all very, very done on purpose. So I thought it's very interesting.
I was going to say something that escapes me right now. Oh, yes, the study hour. They were quite religious in their militancy, and membership required discipline in the organization. And there was a whole process that you had to go through in order to become a member of the Young Lords or the Black Panthers, for that matter. And that discipline included a daily reading hour during which they read Marx, Frantz Fanon, the writings of the major revolutionary wars and movements of the period. This was a moment of wars and revolutions against European colonial rule in Vietnam, in Algeria, Asia, and Africa. So they were a studied bunch.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool the way they structured their group. They literally had a minister of defense, a minister of all these different, like, minister posts, kind of, as kind of a nod to this revolutionary character. The idea is to eventually replace the system that we have in some way, right?
Okay, this man actually read the book.
Yeah, thank you. That's right. Thank you. All right. Who's corny now, huh? All right. I think what's interesting, too, is that what's amazing about these kinds of movements and stories is that people often overlook them because like this one, 2 years, 69 to 71, and then it slowly faded away because, one, they went to Puerto Rico, they spread themselves out too thin. It's a whole thing. You should definitely read the book, but they still managed to do a lot. And I think with groups like this and movements like this, it's easy to say, oh, they lasted 2 years, they're gone, what'd they do? Yeah, what's that, next, whatever, like they didn't do anything. But they actually changed the conversation. And they really kind of brought new people into the conversation. And I think that's what can be so disheartening to people who try to change things today. I think that's the nature of progressive movements. You're never going to change everything in one fell swoop, in one lifetime even. So you have to kind of take your victories, your occupations, your publicity, and all these different things as those victories, right?
So you can't really judge a movement on the basis of their existence temporally. Movements are judged on the basis of what they accomplish. All movements, unless they're revolutions, are short-lived. Think about the Black Lives Matter movement. It was short-lived, but it changed the conversation in the United States about the role of the police in society. A lot of people know today, as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement, that the police emerge out of the institution of slavery. They are descendants of slave patrols that were responsible for returning escaped enslaved people back to the plantation. The Young Lords are important, first of all, because they forced a conversation about health into the public sphere in New York. And one of the things they concretely won or drafted was the first known patient Bill of Rights, something that we take for granted today. And the first, it was a 10-point Bill of Rights, and the first one was all patients deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. All patients deserve to understand what their doctor is assessing for their health, and whether the recommendations are beneficial to them. All patients deserve to understand what their doctor is saying, so if they don't speak English, they need a translator. And that's important here in New York because a lot of people in New York are immigrants who don't speak English. And this, the availability of translation services in hospitals is in part a product of the struggles of the Young Lords and others during that period. But that their patient Bill of Rights is really fascinating. They also argue and state that healthcare is a human right and healthcare should not be profit-driven. anywhere in the world.
Yeah. Oh man, we don't have enough time to go into that one. That's for sure. Holy Lord, you're 100% right. But no, you're right. Like I think a lot of the progressive movements and groups like this, their wins come in changing the dialogue, changing the conversation. You know, you talk about Occupy Wall Street's a good example. I mean, it was an incredible thing when that happened, and it lasted like a month and a half, 2 months, and all the people in Wall Street made fun of it. Like, look at that, it went away. But you wouldn't have Bernie Sanders without Occupy Wall Street. You wouldn't have the words, you know, the 99%, the 1%ers. Those words were invented during Occupy Wall Street. This idea, you had people, the conservative media talking about the 1%. If you'd done that in 2005, you would have been called a communist. Those things entered the conversation because of this failed movement. But it's easy to overlook that, and you have to be able to see those victories. That's part of being, you know, on the right side of history, is being able to see that as well, you know.
The Occupy Wall Street movement made it acceptable to criticize capitalism in American society without being called a communist, derided as a communist. Communist.
And that is our cue. Whenever communism comes up, we got to keep it moving. Or else the police comes in here
and knocks heads.
And we get it's happened too many times in here. All right. So we have this part of the show now. It is called Rapid Fire Questions. Here we go. Rapid Fire Questions. Look at that. Our faces are on fire. How cool is that?
I wasn't prepared for this. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, that's right. All right, let's see how you do. Okay, here we go. All right, so for you, these aren't going to be about communism, unless you want them to be. But just some questions about New York. You're a native New Yorker. Let's see what you think. To you, what place defines New York City?
You know what? I'm from the Boogie Down, the Bronx. Hip-hop.
Ah, okay.
Breakdancing. The Bronx, the heart and soul. It's the best and the worst of New York resides in the Bronx.
Nice. That's good. I like that. And what specific place?
The Yankee Stadium. Yo!
This guy, Mario's got the Yankees on.
Woohoo!
He answered a question about the Boston Red Sox, though.
Right, all the commandments were broken.
Here.
Out.
No, okay. All right, well, let's keep it moving here. We got a bunch. All right, cool. What's your favorite restaurant in New York?
You know what? Restaurants are outrageously expensive post-pandemic, and the food is terrible.
Okay. So, Dollar Pizza. Got it.
I can't even think of one right now. I like Mumbai masala in my neighborhood. Indian, right? There was Rosen. What kind of an?
Oh, he's Iranian.
I know, but what kind of Iranian name is Rosen?
Oh, he's Jewish.
He's a Jewish Iranian. Okay,
yes, right.
Beautiful. I actually ordered today a garbanzo chaat.
A garbanzo shot?
Yeah, a garbanzo shot. So I didn't order chicken tikka masala.
Where was this? Like at the bar?
At Mumbai
Give me 2
masala.
shots of garbanzo. I'm getting wasted tonight. All right, 2 shots of garbanzo. Let's keep it moving. Sorry I asked. All right, here we go. We were talking about movies, and who would play you in a movie?
Oh, Lord Jesus.
All right, Lord Jesus. Next question. Here we go. What is your slogan for New York City?
It stinks in the summer.
You know, you didn't say it stinks all the time, so that's a win. We can keep moving. This is a good one. I always like to get people's answer on this one. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen in New York?
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait. So I went to Manhattan Center for Science and Math, which was the old Benjamin Franklin in East Harlem. It's on 116th Street. You can see it off the FDR Drive. You guys probably don't drive, so you don't know. I'm a New York driver. I went to New York during the crack epidemic. And so I got off the 6th train on 116th Street, height of the 80s. I'm walking to school, crack vials, just, running down the street. It's on a slope and it's raining. And a cop pointed a gun at me.
Whoa.
There was some kind of sting operation, and somehow I got caught in the crosshairs. So it's not something I saw. It's something that happened to me.
How old were you?
And I made it. I was like 16.
Wow.
16, yeah.
Well, that's pretty intense. I was going to say someone slipping on ice or something, but all right. Getting a gun pointed at you. Okay, let's keep it moving. What's your favorite book? What book would you recommend to this audience to read? Aside from your book. All right, take it easy.
Damn. Okay, I'm a professor, so I mean there are many books. Okay.
We know you're a professor. She reads books.
Okay. Can I assign an article and a book?
Yeah, sure. More homework. All right, perfect.
Okay, so I studied with Barbara Fields many moons ago when I got my PhD, and she wrote an article that won her the MacArthur Award, which is the Genius Award, and the title of that article is Slavery, Race, and Ideology in the United States of America. I assign that article every time I have the opportunity. It's all that and a bag of chips. And then, Jesus, I want to remember the title on my brain, you know. This book is, oh yes. So, you know, when you're writing a book, you have to identify the books that comport to your understanding of the world and your theoretical, intellectual, and historical lineage. I'm a historian. And I read Radio Free Dixie, The Origins of the Black Power Movement. Robert Williams and the Origins of the Black Power Movement. Radio Free Dixie, Robert Williams and the Origins of the Black Power Movement. It's beautifully written, and its analysis of Jim Crow in the South, I think, is top-notch. And Robert Williams is a phenomenal figure, the figure that really kicks off the Black Power movement, which few people know about.
All right, I have to read that. All right. Read that in addition to your book, obviously. You got to read her book, everybody, The Young Lords. Round of applause. This is not to, like, single you out. Round of applause if you didn't know who the Young Lords were before today. Look at that.
All right.
We're changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds,
That's how you do
educating
it.
New Yorkers.
Yeah, it's a really incredible story. And, you know, I sometimes am a little bit, like, averse to reading things that are too niche. But this is a book that's still relevant today, and that's what an amazing author does. They make things that are specific more broad and accessible.
Can I just say one thing
Sure.
that I must say before I leave?
Yep.
First of all, my book is about the Young Lords, but it's also about the period. So if you want to understand the period, please read my book. But the period is important for three reasons. The 60s changed the relationship between people of color and white people in America through the Civil Rights and Black Power movement, and especially the relationship between white people and Black Americans. It educated Americans around the issues of gender and sexuality. The women's rights movement, the gay and lesbian liberation movement. And the 60s is important because it made critiquing U.S. foreign policy the order of the day, immediately after the Cold War. So it really produced a cultural revolution in this country that forever changed our nation.
Yeah, and it's all covered in the book. I really recommend the book. One last question. It's a very important one. Let's see how you do. I'm scared to ask this. Will you be my friend? I was nervous about that.
Let's eliminate, a little of the corny Nicaraguan kid who wants to do the most factor, and we'll think about it.
I was voted that in high school.
Of course I will.
Yeah. All right. And real quick, before we leave, I just wanted to say, first of all, Guys, this is pretty amazing because today is Johanna's birthday. And I got you a gift. Here you go. It's got a little caveat bag. You can, yeah.
Purple is the color of the young lords.
That's right. That's right. I told Caveat to specifically order it for you.
Oh,
so I got you a little mug and also a picture. We couldn't take a picture here, so I just, this is the picture I gave her.
Okay.
It's a picture. I had to print it out before the show, so I couldn't get it.
This is a mugshot of my photograph in the New York Times because I sued the NYPD for failing to release to me the surveillance records of the young lords. And I won.
Come on. That's amazing. So yeah, you can impress all your professor friends with this right here. Look at that. Look at that. Thank you so much. Thank you.